"Hurry up and do it, you lazy dogs," he shouted, his voice easily piercing through the frozen ground. God's field does not take care of itself. You redouble your efforts and ignore the pain in your hands and back. The feudal system that ruled your life was simple and cruel. You kept working until you were completely exhausted. When you can no longer work, you will be replaced. There is no retirement, no disability allowance, and no form of security guarantee. Either work or die. Sometimes you still die. Your stomach makes a hollow and painful sound, reminding you that you ate too little this morning. A piece of black bread so hard that it can crush your teeth, when drunk with light beer, tastes more like dirty water than modern beer. You haven't eaten for 8 hours. Your body is starting to consume energy. This is chronic malnutrition. It's not the dramatic hunger you might imagine, but a slow and tormenting one that drains your strength and casts a shadow over your mind. You are always hungry, always tired, and always working at the edge of your physical capacity, surviving with the fewest calories. But this adaptation comes at a cost. You are very weak, prone to illness and aging much faster than you should. It's so cold now that it's unbearable. Your feet were wrapped in strips of cloth and stuffed into rough leather shoes, completely numb. You suspect that a few of your toes might have been frostbitten, but there's nothing you can do. You can't stop working to warm your feet, can't seek shelter, and can't even step on your feet to restore blood circulation without the risk of the supervisor's anger. Your clothes can hardly withstand the wind and rain. You are wearing a thick woolen corset that reaches your knees, a loose linen undergarment, and your woolen shoes are tied to your braid with a belt. On this you have a thin cloak with more holes than fabric, worn out due to years of use and rough treatment. Wool is itchy and uncomfortable. But this is your clothes. It is dyed with any available material, perhaps a faded red or a natural brown. The color is soft and simple. Nothing can be like the bright colors you see in medieval manuscripts depicting the clothing of the rich. Your clothes haven't been washed for several weeks. Water is precious. Soap is very expensive. The time spent washing and drying clothes is the time you can't spare from your life. On the contrary, you just wear your clothes until they fall apart, and then fix them or replace them if you can afford it. When you are working, you will be aware of the sounds around you. The water belt rhythmically strikes the frozen land. Occasionally, your colleagues will make sounds of effort, and the wind howls past the barren land. But behind all this was an even more ominous voice, the sick lungs struggling to deal with the quacking of the cold air. The person working next to you, Thomas, a farmer in his 30s who looks like he's 50, is coughing up blood. The cold air, physical exhaustion and dust on the permafrost jointly damaged his lungs. Every time I cough, I drop bright reed liquid onto the grey soil. You know, he will die within a year, but he keeps working because he has no choice. Disease was a frequent visitor in the Middle Ages. Everyone has something. Persistent coughing, wound infection that cannot heal, and parasites eroding their strength. Apart from the medical services provided by the village's wise woman with her limited knowledge of herbs and folk remedies, there were no other medical services. Most minor illnesses can only be endured until they get better on their own or kill you. The church bells rang in the distance, the bronze minus-like sound cutting through the wind like a blade. Normal free time. There are still 2 hours before it's time to get off work. But in winter, these 2 hours felt like eternity. The sun has already set on the horizon. You know that darkness will fall before you are allowed to stop working. Your world has shrunk to a small patch of land in front of you, the weight of the hoe in your hand, and the constant struggle against cold, hunger and exhaustion. This is the influence of medieval labor on the human spirit. It turns you into a machine, a tool that transforms human suffering into agricultural productivity. The feudal system that governs your life is a heavy burden, oppressing every aspect of your life. The land where you work doesn't belong to you. You are bound to it and the master who controls it. He had to work in his field for a certain number of days, every weekend, give him his share of the produce. You can't leave without permission. Marriage is not allowed without consent. You can't sell that little bit of your product if you don't give it to your master first. You are not entirely a slave, but you are not free either. You are somewhere in between, trapped in a system with almost no hope of improvement or escape. The Lord himself, in his warm and cozy manner, counts the benefits of your suffering. He had never worked in the fields for a single day and had never felt the cold wind of severe winter or the torment of hunger. You are not a person with emotions and needs. You are a device that requires effort to drive to achieve maximum productivity. As the afternoon passed, the weather got colder and colder. The wind began to blow, once again furiously sweeping across the open fields. It will cut through your thin clothes just like paper. You can feel it stealing the last bit of your body heat. Your breath forms thick clouds that almost immediately freeze, creating ice crystals around your beard and nostrils. Your hand hurts very much now. The wooden handle of the hoe is worn out. There is only a small patch of skin left on your palm, and the wound is still bleeding. It will take several weeks to heal completely. The free flow of blood makes the handle slippery and hard to grasp. You have to stop frequently to wipe away the bloodstains, but each time you stop, it may draw the attention of the supervisor. Other workers around you have also shown similar signs of pain. Several people were lame due to injuries sustained at work during the day, and their bodies were distorted by cramps. But no one stopped. No one complained. No one sought help. They all know that showing weakness will only make the situation worse. Disaster struck. An old woman named Edith, about 30 years old, although she looked very old by modern standards, suddenly let out a loud cry and knelt down on the ground. The cold finally overcame her physical functions, and she could no longer support her weight. The supervisor immediately rode over, his face turning black with anger. "Get up," he shouted. "God's work does not wait for the sick." Edith tried to stand up, but her legs couldn't support her. She fell down again, this time face down into the frozen soil. The overseer dismounted and gave her a hard kick on the ribs, breaking her bones. "Let me speak," he roared and raised his whip. "Please, sir," said Edith, panting, blood dripping from her mouth. "I can't. I'm too cold. I need to rest." The supervisor's response was prompt and cruel. The whip struck Edith on the back, making the sound of chopping firewood. She screamed, a sound of pure pain that cut across the field like a blade. The whip rose and fell, tearing her thin woolen clothes and making long cuts in her flesh. "Would you like to help? You want to intervene, but you know doing so will only make things worse for both of you." The feudal system did not allow disobedience. Stopping a punished colleague would be regarded as a rebellion against authority. You continued working, your eyes fixed on the ground, trying to block out Edith's agonizing voice. After a period of time that seemed eternal, my heart stopped beating. Edith lay motionless on the frozen ground, blood gathering at her feet. The supervisor got back on the horse and addressed the other workers. "Let this be a lesson for all of you," he said coldly. "God desires his servants to be strong and reliable. Those who fail to meet his expectations will be replaced." 2 young workers were ordered to drag Edith to the edge of the field and leave her there. Her life and death are no longer the responsibility of the supervisor. She was regarded as a loss, a discarded bad tool. Her 6 children will now be orphans, either surviving on their own or dying in struggle. This incident had an impact on the remaining workers. Everyone knows that they could be the next one. A moment of weakness or bad luck can lead to the same fate. This fear is obvious, adding another layer of pressure to an already unbearable situation. You redoubled your efforts, disregarding the pain in your hands and back, pushing your body beyond its limits and desperately trying to avoid Edith's fate. The hull feels like it weighs 100 pounds. Every time it strikes the frozen ground, it generates shock waves that travel from your arm to your shoulder. The sun continued to descend mercilessly towards the horizon, casting long shadows on the frozen ground. The temperature is steadily dropping. Every minute that passes, you can feel the cold seeping into your bones. Your body starts to shut down on minus essential functions to maintain core temperature, which is a dangerous sign of hypothermia. Your vision is starting to blur and it's hard for you to keep your balance. Your injured hands are losing too much blood. Coupled with the cold and exhaustion, they are pushing you to the brink of collapse. But you can't stop. Edith's broken body at the edge of the field kept reminding the workers who couldn't keep up with the progress of what would happen. At about 5:30, the church bells rang again, marking another week. This voice seems to echo in your increasingly weakened consciousness, reminding you that time is passing. But liberation is still far away. There is still half an hour until the official end of the day. But in your case, this might be eternal. Your colleagues are in a similar situation as well. Several people fell down and were dragged away like Edith. There are still some people working despite obvious injuries, fractures, deep cuts, or internal bleeding. The battlefield has turned into a scene of hell, with wounded soldiers walking everywhere. They continue to work because the other option is death. The social hierarchy that rules this nightmare is rigid and ruthless. High above is the Lord in his warm and cozy manner, counting the benefits of your suffering. Under him were the overseers, well-fed and well-clothed, who carried out the Lord's will through violence and intimidation. At the very bottom are you and your fellow farmers, exploited by a system that values you even less than the animals you care for. The church, which was supposed to offer comfort and hope, has instead strengthened this cruel system. The pastors proclaim that your suffering is God's will, your poverty is a test of your faith, and your only hope lies in the afterlife. They tell you to be grateful for your fate, humbly accept your pain, and never question the sacred order that binds you in chains. That when your back is injured and your hands bleed, the sacred order feels like a cruel joke. When you watch your neighbor being beaten to death because it's too cold to work, the promise of heaven seems empty. However, you still hold on to your beliefs because they are all you have. Without hope for a better life after death, existence will become meaningless. Near 6 o'clock, you realize that you won't make it through the day. Your body has reached its absolute limit, and you can feel yourself starting to shut down. Your eyes are digging tunnels. Your hearing has become blurred and your movements have become increasingly unstable. We're on the verge of collapse. You know when it comes, it will be final. But in any case, you still keep moving forward. The primitive survival instinct takes the lead, driving your body forward. Even if your consciousness has given up, the hell will still rise and fall, rhythmically like breathing. You are no longer alone. You are a machine, a tool that transforms pain into productivity. The church bell rings at 6 o'clock during Vespers. The supervisor finally finished his day's work. His voice spread throughout the entire venue, just like a suspended death sentence. You leaned against the hoe, panting heavily, your body trembling with exhaustion and cold. "Take the tools away," shouted the supervisor. "But remember, you'll be back at dawn. I hope there will be a better job tomorrow." You dropped the hoe on the spot and your hand was so injured that it could no longer hold it. Around you, your colleague is also going through the same process of breakdown. Their bodies finally acknowledge the punishment they had endured. Walking back to the village was a painful and exhausting nightmare. Your legs are shaking so badly that you can't even stand up, let alone walk. With every step you take, your frozen feet will feel waves of pain, and you suspect that several toes have been completely frostbitten. When night falls, the village comes into view. Under the dim light, its collection appears even more disheartening. The smoke rising from the cooking fire formed a layer of grey smoke, shrouding the settlement over it, just like a shroud at a funeral. The smell had already attacked you before you reached the first house. Human excrement, animal manure and unwashed corpses were all mixed together. This was life in the Middle Ages. But now, this scent represents home, warmth, and the promise of a few hours of respite from the harsh demands of feudal labor. You stagger towards your hell, and your body is now completely driven by instinct, by the urgent need for shelter and rest. After the sun vanished below the horizon, true darkness began to envelop the medieval world. But your suffering is far from over. The real test has just begun. One has to endure a winter night in the harsh cold environment where most modern people would lose their lives. Your house comes into view. A poor building made of soil, wooden sticks and hope. It can remain upright no matter what the wind is or what the weather is like. This is all you have. And now, it represents the difference between life and death. You pushed open the wooden door. It was actually just planks joined together with ropes and leather hinges. You staggered in. The contrast between the cold outside and that inside is negligible, but after a day of hardship, even a few degrees of warmth can make one feel like a blessing. Your family is waiting for you around the small fire in the center of the room. When you came in, your wife Margaret raised her head. Seeing your situation, her face turned pale with fright. You must look like a walking corpse, covered in blood and dirt. Exhaustion and cold make you shiver all over and you can hardly stand up. "Dear Mary," she whispered, her voice filled with fear. "What did they do to you?" You tried to answer but couldn't say a word. Your throat aches from inhaling cold air and dust, and your voice has become hoarse like that of a horse. On the contrary, you simply collapsed onto a three-legged stool by the fireplace. After propping yourself up on the frozen ground for several hours, your legs finally gave up. The heat of the flame is both a blessing and a curse. When the blood circulation gradually returns to your frozen limbs, the pain becomes unbearable. Your hands and feet are in intense pain, making you want to scream. But you gritted your teeth and endured it, because you knew that the permanent damage caused by frostbite could be even worse. Your children are curled up in the corner of the room. When they see your situation, their eyes are wide open in fear. Your youngest, 5-year-old little Mary, is coughing. A deep and damp sound that you can identify as the beginning of a fever in the lungs. A few days later, she will either recover or die. You can't change the outcome. Your son John is 8 years old and looks several years older than this morning. The father's pain took away the last bit of his innocence and forced him to face the cruel reality of the world he was born into. Agnes, your 12-year-old daughter, is trying to comfort her younger siblings while helping her mother deal with your wound. Under the flickering flames, you will feel that your entire world is smaller than ever before. Animals that share your living space. A pig, several chickens and a goat if you are lucky enough to have one seem to take up more space than they should. Their existence constantly reminds you of how small the comfortable space you leave for humanity is. These animals are not merely domestic animals. They are your insurance against hunger and your only source of warmth beyond the meager fire. This pig will eventually be slaughtered and cured into winter meat. Chickens lay eggs and occasionally have meat. The milk produced by goats can be drunk fresh or made into cheese. But tonight, they have another purpose. Their body heat helps warm up the space, although it comes at the expense of hygiene and air quality. This smell is too bad. A mixture of animal feces, human sweat, smoke, and the metallic smell of your blood. But this is normal. This is the flavor of a medieval peasant home. Everyone lives in these smells because there's no other choice. Margaret brought you a clay cup filled with hot malt liquor, even though it would hurt your throat. This liquid is sour and weak, but very warm. This is the most important thing. She also brought a bowl of water and began to clean your wound. When she was cleaning, the dirt and debris accumulated on the wound. Her touch was gentle but bound to cause pain. Your hand is ruined. The palm trees are now raw meat, with loose skin and free inus flowing blood. When you try to move your fingers, several of them don't react properly. Tendons may be severed, or the damage caused by cold and trauma may be too severe to function properly. These hands were once the tools on which you relied for survival, but they may no longer function properly. Its impact is terrifying. In the Middle Ages, a person who couldn't work with both hands was basically useless. There is no disability support, no alternative work, and no form of safety guarantee. If your hand doesn't heal, your family will go hungry. It's that simple, yet so cruel. Margaret began to apply pus made from herbs and animal fats to your wound. This mixture is very painful, but she knows this is your only chance to prevent infection. In a world without antibiotics, even a very small wound if infected, can be life-threatening. Your hand, with deep wounds and exposed to a dirty environment, is a major candidate for sepsis. During her work, your actual situation became clear. You got through the working day, but you just managed to get through it. Your body is broken. Your hand may be permanently damaged. You still have to face the long winter nights ahead. The temperature outside is still dropping, and your helmet can only offer the minimum protection. The walls around you are woven together with branches and sticks, and then coated with soil, straw and animal manure. Adding feces is not for cruelty. This is actually a very practical choice. It helps bond the mixture and provides insulation, but practicality does not mean effectiveness. You can see the sunlight through the cracks of the building, and the wind keeps howling past. Your room has no windows. Glass is a luxury reserved for churches and the rich. Instead, you have a small opening covered with oilcloth or animal skin, which hardly blocks the wind. Cold air seeps in through every crack and crevice, making the room only slightly warmer than the outside. Soil's compacted soil. Due to the condensation at night, it is cold and slightly damp. In winter, it may freeze into a solid. You threw some straw to insulate, but the straw was thin and old, and could hardly resist the cold radiated from the ground. The fire in the center of the room is your only barrier against the cold, but it is far from enough. There is no chimney. The smoke merely rose, hoping to come out of the hole in the thatched roof. Usually, it just floats in the air, making your eyes water and your throat burn. But these smokes have other uses apart from providing the minimum amount of heat. It can preserve the meat hanging on the rafters and also prevent insect bites. Margaret has prepared your family's dinner, more soup and timeless farm dishes. Tonight's version has some barley, some withered radishes, and if you're lucky, a small piece of bacon for seasoning. Before you got home, it had been stewing over the fire, slowly boiling into a grey lump that looked as appetizing as it sounded. You drink the soup with a wooden spoon, trying not to think about what might be in it. Barley is coarse and hard. The turnips are pasty and tasteless, while the pork is too salty, making one shed tears. But it's very hot and filling. It will give you energy and help you get through the night ahead. Due to long-term hunger, your stomach has shrunk. You feel full after eating just a few spoons, but you force yourself to finish the entire bowl. Every calorie you need to consume over the next few long and cold hours. Your body will quickly consume this meager meal. I want to generate enough heat to keep you alive until dawn. While you are having a meal, Margaret tells you about her day. A series of minor struggles and victories made up the life of a medieval woman. She has been spinning yarn the whole morning with the small amount of wool your family managed to get. Jobs that require stable hands and good eyesight. The thread she produces will be woven into fabric, which can be sold or exchanged for other necessities. In the afternoon, she tended to the small garden behind your house, trying to bring life out of the frozen ground. The vegetables she grows, such as radishes, onions and cabbages, provide essential nutrients for your family, that the yield is always uncertain. A late frost, excessive rain, or the invasion of pests can all ruin the fruits of the entire season within a few days. She also spends time taking care of the animals that share your living space. This pig needs feeding and watering. Chickens need care and goats need milking. These animals are not merely domestic animals. They are your insurance against hunger. But maintaining them is a long-term struggle. Feed is expensive and often scarce. Illness can wipe out all your investment within a few days. Theft is a constant threat. It is well known that hungry neighbors will steal animals in the dead of night, and you can hardly stop them. Margaret also told you about the village gossip she heard while drawing water from the well. Edith, the woman beaten by the overseer, died shortly after being dragged out of the field. Her 6 children have been begging for food from other families, but each one is striving to support themselves. There is also news about God's latest requirements. He plans to increase GORV's labor requirement from 3 days a week to 4 days, claiming that his fields need more attention. This means you have less time to cultivate your own land, fewer opportunities to grow food for your family, and fewer chances to survive. But there's nothing you can do about it. The word of God is the law. Farmers who oppose his demands will soon be homeless, or even worse. The church has also demanded an increase in the tithe this year. The priest claimed that the bishop needed more money to repair the cathedral, but everyone knew that most of the money would eventually end up in the pockets of corrupt officials. However, refusing to pay the gnashed axe was regarded as a sin. In medieval villages, being excommunication meant the death of society. When Margaret speaks, you will be aware of the sounds around her. Your child is coughing. They all have persistent fatigue caused by inhaling smoke and cold air. The animals sensed the tense atmosphere in the room and moved restlessly. Outside, you can hear the sound of night falling in the village. The door was closed, the fire was piled up, and occasionally the crying of a baby or the barking of a dog could be heard. But behind all this lies an even more ominous voice. Wind is now speeding up, howling in the corner of your room and searching for every crack in the wall. The temperature is steadily dropping. You know the real test has just begun. The fire in the center of the room began to go out. Margaret added another precious piece of wood to keep it burning. Fuel was expensive and hard to come by, but she knew that putting out the fire would be a death sentence for this family. The temperature in the cellar was almost above freezing. Without the warmth of the fire, you would have frozen to death before morning. Your body begins to respond to the trauma of the day. The adrenaline that made you endure the cruel delivery is gradually fading away, and you start to feel the pain all over your body. Your back has become stiff due to constant bending and the impact of the hoe on the frozen ground. Your shoulders hurt from repetitive swaying movements. Your legs are cramping up from standing on the permafrost for several hours. But what you are most worried about is your hands. They swelled to twice their normal size, and their skin turned black and blue, indicating severe tissue damage. When you try to bend your fingers, the pain is so intense that you almost faint. You may suffer from permanent nerve damage, which will prevent you from holding tools or performing the physical labor you rely on for survival. Margaret noticed your pain and brought you a small earthenware pot filled with a mixture of animal fat and herbs. For your hand, she said simply. Salt is a luxury item. Fat is precious and herbs are expensive. But she knows that if this family is to survive, you need to be able to use your hands. You tried to apply the greasy mixture to your palm, but your fingers wouldn't listen to your command. Margaret must do this for you. Her touch is as gentle as possible, but it will still cause waves of pain in your arm. Fat can offer some protection against infection, and herbs may help relieve pain, but you all know that the damage can be permanent. As night fell, your condition continued to deteriorate. The warmth of the fire restored sensation to your limbs, and then you realized how serious your injury was. Your feet are worse than your hands. Several toes turned completely black, indicating that the tissue had died from frostbite. The next morning, if you have survived the night, you have to decide whether to keep the damaged toes or have them removed to prevent the greenery from spreading. This decision might imply the difference between life and death, but you must complete it without medical training and appropriate tools. Exactly 7 o'clock. This was the last prayer of the day. In monasteries across Europe, monks gathered to sing the last office and then returned to their warm cells. But in your HL, the real struggle has only just begun. The temperature outside has dropped below freezing and it will be even colder before dawn. Your family begins the ritual of getting ready for bed every night. Although sleep is a broad term, you will experience it over the next 12 hours. Margaret carefully made the fire and covered the coal with ashes to help them survive the night. If the fire is completely extinguished, you must reignite it with flint and steel. Even in the best-case scenario, this is a challenging task, and your injured hand may not be able to complete it at all. Your children are crammed onto the strong mattresses that serve as family beds. In medieval peasant households, there was no privacy at all. Everyone sleeps in the same room, usually on the same bed, sharing body temperature and any blankets and cloaks you can collect. The mattress itself is a rough thing. Wooden frame with a rope tied to it was topped with a sack stuffed with straw. The straw was old and heavy, providing almost no cushioning effect on the hard frame beneath. It is also home to a thriving ecosystem of fleas, lice and other parasites that feed on your blood throughout the night. You lie down carefully, and every movement will cause new pain in your injured body. A body doing its best to offer warmth. Your children are huddled tightly on either side of you. Despite the shared warmth, their little bodies are still trembling. The animals in the room had also settled down, but they are restless. They can sense the drop in temperature and the approaching storm. The pig snorted and moved a little in the corner. The chicken has messed up its feathers on the beam of the house, and the goat is crying softly in pain. Outside, the wind is roaring, blowing the snow towards the walls of your hut, getting more and more violent. You all can hear the thatch on the roof creaking and moving. If the roof breaks down, you will be exposed to fierce winter storms, which will be a death sentence for your entire family. The temperature inside the spiral cabin continued to drop. Your breathing forms clouds in the cold air, and you can feel the cold seeping in through the thin walls, just like water seeping out of a window. Fire offers a small circle of warmth, but beyond the small circle, cold reigns supreme. The real battle is about to begin. Not only should one resist the cold, but also the despair. The night stretches before you, just like endless suffering. You know that many people don't survive until dawn. In the villages of medieval Europe, every household huddled together, struggling desperately against the harsh weather. Some people will lose. There will be corpses to be buried tomorrow morning. A family is ruined just because they want to have a good night's sleep. The children will freeze to death in their parents' arms. The elderly will stop breathing because their bodies cannot generate enough heat to sustain life. Even healthy adults can die from hypothermia when their core temperature drops to an irreversible level. But you're not dead yet. You are still breathing, still fighting, still struggling desperately. Your family needs you, and knowledge gives you the strength to endure whatever night may bring. Now the wind is howling even louder. What can you hear? Maybe its branches are loose thatch hitting the walls of your hut. The sound was like the flapping of huge wings, as if some terrifying bird wanted to tear apart your shelter and expose you to the deadly cold. Your child is sobbing in his sleep. Medical bodies are pressed close to you for warmth. Margaret's breathing is short. While she was striving to conserve her energy, she remained vigilant against any signs of danger. The animals are now very quiet, conserving their energy for the long night that is coming. This was the winter of the Middle Ages, a cruel reality. There is no central heating system, no insulating materials, and no protective measures except for building materials you can find. Only human bodies huddle together against the darkness, fighting for survival with just one breath. It's still early at night, and the worst is yet to come. But you've lived for so long. That's amazing. In a world where death is only a cold night away, living for another hour is a victory worth celebrating. The fire crackled gently in the center of the room, and the flames danced gracefully on the smoky walls. The storm outside is getting more and more violent, but within your humble heart, life continues to struggle tenaciously against the forces that want to destroy it. Clench your eyes and try to rest, because you know that in the next few long and cold hours, you will need every bit of strength. The true test of your endurance has only just begun. Only time will tell whether you have the ability to see another dawn. The church bells rang at 8 o'clock. Their bronze sound was almost inaudible in the howling wind, which was now pounding your body as fiercely as a living thing. The storm that was quite threatening just an hour ago has now hit in full force. What followed was such a strong cold that it seemed to weigh heavily on your family members like a vicious presence. You lie on the straw mat, your body in great pain from a day's hard work, listening to the wind tearing at the thatched grass above your head. Every gust of wind would blow the fragments into the room like a shower. Straw shards, dust, and occasionally even larger fragments smashed onto the floor, making an ominous thumping sound. The roof was temporarily saved, but you could hear its groans under the attack. You knew it was only a matter of time before something collapsed. After the sun sets, the temperature in your room dropped sharply. A little warmth provided by the fire is also being sucked away by the wind that searches every crack and crevice on your walls. Hanging in the air like mist, you could feel ice crystals forming inside the walls, and your exhalation froze on the cold stones and mud. Your child was pressed close to you and Margaret. Despite the shared warmth, their little bodies were still trembling uncontrollably. Little Mary's cough got worse throughout the night. You could hear a damp creaking sound, which indicated fluid accumulation in her lungs. She has a high fever. Her tiny body was engaged in a doomed battle against lung disease, which claimed the lives of many children during the harsh winter months. John, your 8-year-old son, is trying to be brave, but you can feel his body trembling over yours. He is still too young to understand the severity of your situation, but he is old enough to sense the fear that pervaded the room. Your 12-year-old daughter Agnes lay on Margaret's other side, her eyes wide open in the firelight, looking and listening to every sound. The animals that share your living space are becoming increasingly restless. This pig kept humming in the corner, moving restlessly, sensing the drop in temperature and the approach of danger. The chickens on the beams were huddled together, their feathers shaking, desperately trying to keep their bodies warm. Even the usually calm goat is bleeding gently in pain. Margaret stood up carefully, trying not to disturb the children, and added another precious piece of wood to the fire. The flames flickered for a while, casting dancing shadows on the wall, but you all knew that your fuel supply was limited. You may have enough wood to hold on until midnight. If you are careful enough, you might be able to hold on a little longer. After that, you can only rely on the heat generated by your own body. "How is your hand?" Margaret asked calmly and sat down beside you. You tried to bend your fingers, but the pain was unbearable. Throughout the night, the swelling became even more severe, and your hand now looks like a comical imitation of yourself before. Lowland, discolored, completely useless. You can't catch anything. One can't clench one's fist. The fingers could hardly move. Brokenly whispered, your voice hoarse from breathing in the cold air. I don't think they will recover, do I?" Margaret nodded gloomily. She had seen such injuries before and knew what they meant. You can't work without using your hands. Without a job, this family has no income. This is a death sentence pronounced in slow motion. Gradually sliding towards hunger and homelessness, this might take several months to complete. But that's tomorrow's problem if you survive tonight. Is the cold. It is still seeping into the room. The wind blew a loose blanket against the wall at your feet. You can feel the cold air flowing through the crevices, just like water flowing over a broken dam. Margaret stuffed some rags at the hole, but this was at best a temporary solution. The wind merely found other ways, whistling through the crevices you didn't even know existed. Your little house, which seemed solid during the day, now reveals itself to be nothing but a piece of stick-and earth pieced together from hope and despair. The sound of the storm grew louder and louder. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and from time to time the sounds of branches falling and wood pulling could be heard. Somewhere in the village, you hear the sound of a roof collapsing. A sharp cracking sound, followed by screams, was soon swallowed up by the wind. Another family lost their residence. In such weather, this means they might have lost their lives as well. Your own roof can still hold up, but it can just barely hold up. You can see the rafters bending with each gust of wind, and occasionally a piece of thatch loosens and falls into the room. The hole it left allows more cold air to enter. You know that if too many fragments fall down, the entire structure will collapse. Disaster struck. A particularly fierce wind blew away a section of the thatched roof near the door, creating a gap large enough for snow to blow directly into the room. The temperature dropped immediately. As the wind swirled in the small space, the fire was almost extinguished. Margaret jumped up and tried to fill the hole with any materials she could find. Old clothes, straw, and even fragments of wooden furniture. but the wind was so strong that everything she had placed was blown away immediately. Snow began to pile up on the floor, and you became increasingly frightened to realize that your shelter was collapsing. Said Margaret, her voice tense with panic. "If we can't stop the wind, we'll all freeze." We tried to stand up to help, but your body wouldn't listen. The combination of exhaustion, injury and cold makes it almost impossible for you to move. Your legs feel like lead. When you try to stand up, you immediately fall onto the mattress again. Although Agnes is only 12 years old, she is in charge of handling this matter. She grabbed your only piece of furniture minus a 3-legged stool, wedged it into the hole, and then piled up everything she could find on it. This is not a perfect solution, but it reduces the flow of cold air enough to prevent the fire from going out completely. But the damage has already been done. The temperature in the room dropped even more sharply. You could see that thick clouds formed with each exhalation of your breath. Your child is trembling violently. Their tiny bodies can't generate enough heat to keep them warm. Little Mary's lips began to turn blue and her breathing became increasingly difficult. It was at this moment that you realized you might not survive tonight. Cold is no longer merely discomfort. It is becoming fatal. Hypothermia begins to occur. If there is not enough heat, the core temperature of your family members will continue to drop until your body completely stops working. Margaret seemed to have realized this as well. She looked at you with eyes full of fear and despair. You could see her calculating the odds and trying hard to find a way to keep everyone alive until tomorrow morning. The mathematical law of survival is cruel and ruthless. You only have limited fuel, limited food, and unlimited cold. "We need to stay together," she said calmly. "All of us are as close as possible. Share our body temperatures. This is the only strategy available to you and one that medieval families have been using for centuries. When the external heat source fails, the human body becomes the last line of defense against the cold. Bring the children closer and place them in the middle. This way, the youngest child will be the warmest, while the adults offer protection outside." The animals seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation as well. The pig got closer to the fire, and the goat also approached the bed at home, something it had never done before. Even the chickens came down from the rafters and crowded on the floor beside the soon -be extinguished flames. You created a pile of living corpses, humans and animals, all crowded together, desperately trying to preserve the heat. This is disgraceful. Not feeling well. But this might be the difference between life and death. Your child is no longer shivering so much, and you can feel that their little bodies have regained some warmth. But you still lost. The fire still burned even lower. You knew your fuel was running out. Every piece of wood you add to the fire will be missing over a long period of time in the future. But without fire, you would die within a few hours. The wind outside continues to roar, and now you can hear other sounds. The sound of trees falling, the screams of animals in the storm, and the chimes from the church hour in the distance. This is not merely a winter storm. Its disaster destroyed everything it reached. Your village is being torn apart by forces beyond human control. You can do nothing but curl up in your dilapidated shelter, hoping that morning will come before the cold arrives. Other families are also going through the same hardships. They are engaged in the same desperate battle with nature, but many of them are losing. In the face of this storm, the social hierarchy that governs your daily life is meaningless. Both the lord and the peasants were subject to the weather, although the lord had better shelters, more fuel and warmer clothes. But even they were not immune to the destructive power of medieval winter nights. At about 9:30, you heard a voice that sent shivers down your spine. From somewhere in the village came the crying of a baby. The crying grew weaker and farther away, and finally stopped completely. Another life was taken away by the cold. Another family was destroyed because they tried to survive in the winter night. Your own child is still alive, but on the verge of death. Mary's fever was getting worse and her breathing was getting shallower. Lum had completely fallen silent. To sustain the basic act of life, he had reserved his energy. Agnes continued to help Margaret watch over the fire and adjust the temporary barrier to protect against the hole in the roof. But you could see that she was also getting weaker. Flame burned even lower. Margaret made a painful decision and added another piece of wood. This is one of your last things, but without it, the flame will completely go out, and that will be the end of all of you. The wood is quickly absorbed, giving off a brief warmth and glow, but you know it won't last long. Your body is starting to stop functioning. Your limbs are completely numb now, and your hands and feet have no sensation at all. This is a dangerous signal. This means that your body is redirecting blood out of your limbs to protect your vital organs. If this process continues, you will lose your fingers and toes due to frostbite, provided that you live long enough. Your thinking has also become sluggish. Simple decisions become difficult. You will find yourself staring at the fire for a long time without actually seeing it. Your body stores energy by shutting down on minus essential functions, including certain parts of the brain. Margaret noticed your situation and gently shook you. "Stay awake," she said anxiously in a low voice. "Don't go to sleep. If you go to sleep now, you might not wake up." She's right. Of course, sleeping in such a situation is fatal. Your body temperature will continue to drop and you will fall into a coma and never recover. But staying awake requires energy you don't have, and with your eyes closed, the temptation to go with the flow is almost overwhelming. The church bells rang at 10 o'clock, although the sound was almost drowned out by the howling wind. You have been fighting for 4 hours. There are still 8 hours before dawn. The night is endless, and the endless pine unfolds before you like a prison sentence. Your fuel is running out. Margaret counted the remaining pieces of wood. Perhaps it's enough to hold on for another hour. If she's careful enough, perhaps she can hold on for 2 hours. After that, you will be completely dependent on your body temperature and any protection your shelter can offer. Despite Agnes' efforts to repair it, the hole in the roof still grew larger. More snow was blown in, the temperature continued to drop. You reckon the temperature in your room is far below zero now, and it will get even colder before morning. It was at this moment that you began to understand why so many people couldn't survive the winter of the Middle Ages. It's not just cold. This is its cruel nature. It is constantly draining your strength and your will to live on. You are not merely fighting for your own life. You are fighting for your reason, your hope, your most fundamental humanity, that you are still alive. That's remarkable. Your family members are still breathing and still on the verge of death. Margaret continued to guard the sacred flame like a priestess. Your children huddle together, drawing strength from you just as you draw strength from them. All the animals are still alive too. Their warm bodies add precious heat to the small space. The body of a pig provides a wind-proof barrier, and the body heat of a goat helps warm the air around the family bed. Even the chickens huddled on the floor have contributed their share to the collective survival. Outside the house, a fierce storm was raging. Trees are falling, roofs are collapsing, and people are dying. But deep in your humble heart, life is still tenaciously struggling against the force that wants to destroy it. Close your eyes for a while, not to sleep, but to accumulate strength for the long time ahead. The fire crackled gently, and the flames danced on the faces of your family members. Margaret held your hand and gently stroked you, even though the cold numbed your skin. "We'll succeed," she whispered, though you could tell from her voice that she was skeptical. "Let's talk about it tomorrow morning. You should trust her. Believe that your family will get through this hardship. But you have endured too many winters, buried too many neighbors, and have no illusions about your chances. The winter nights of the Middle Ages were old pillars, and this one is forming to be even worse than most. However, you're not dead yet. You are still fighting, still breathing, still holding onto a glimmer of hope, hoping that dawn will come before the cold arrives. In a world where survival cannot be guaranteed, this is what everyone can demand." The wind grew louder, the fire lower, and the night stretched out ahead like an endless tunnel of cold and darkness. But you are still here, still alive, and still refusing to give up. The real test has only just begun. The church bells rang at 10 o'clock. Their bronze sound was almost swallowed up by the howling wind and now sounded like the scream of a cursed person. The storm has reached its peak of rage, with each gust closing your blinds like a dying creature. The temperature has dropped so low that your breathing not only forms clouds. The ice crystals it produced fell onto the floor, making a faint jingling sound. Your fire is going out. Although Margaret carefully rationed, you only had a few pieces of wood left, and each piece of wood represented the warmth to sustain life for 30 minutes. The flames that once danced merrily in the center of the room have now turned into several twinkling or engined blue tongues, almost invisible in the smoke, as the smoke can no longer climb out of the damaged roof. The hole that Agnes had mended earlier was getting larger and larger. Snow kept blowing into the room and piling up in piles on the wall. The temperature inside your HV has dropped to match that of the external air, far below 0 degrees, cold enough to be fatal within a few hours. Your shelter, which seems sufficient during the day, has turned into a windbreak. Your children are in big trouble. Little Mary's fever has gone down, but it's not very good. Her body temperature dropped so low that she could no longer generate heat through illness. She lay motionless between you and Margaret. Her breathing was very shallow. You had to press your ear against her chest to make sure she was still alive. Her lips are blue. Her skin was sallow and pale. Her pulse was almost undetectable. John no longer trembled. This was the most dangerous sign. When the body stops trembling, it means that hypothermia has reached a critical stage. His core body temperature has dropped to a point where his muscles can no longer function properly, and his body is shutting down unnecessary systems to preserve the remaining little heat. Although Agnes is the biggest, she is actually in the best condition among your children. Her greater weight has given her more reserves. She had been helping Margaret keep an eye on the fire, which made her more active and warmer than her siblings. But even she showed severe hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, and obvious drowsiness before losing consciousness. Margaret herself is also on the decline. She has been warming the children with her own body temperature all along. For the survival of the children, she sacrificed her own life, just as mothers in history did. Her hands were so cold that she could hardly manipulate the wood. Her movements became slow and clumsy. You tried to help, but your own condition deteriorated sharply. Your hands are completely useless now, swollen, discolored and numb. Your feet can't feel it at all. When you try to move your legs, a response is very slow, if any. Your mind is getting more and more confused, and you find yourself forgetting the time and place. This is severe hypothermia, you know. Your core body temperature has dropped below 90 degrees Fahrenheit and your body is beginning to stop functioning. Your heart rate has slowed down, your breathing has become shallower, and your blood pressure has dropped. If not heated immediately, you will die within a few hours. But there are no immediate signs of warming up yet. You have exhausted most of your energy. Your shelter is collapsing. The storm outside shows no sign of abating. You are trapped in the death trap you have created yourself. You have no choice but to wait for the inevitable ending. The animals are also suffering. That pig was humming and moving around, and mine has stopped just now, but now it has quieted down. You're not sure if it's dead or just conserving energy. But if it doesn't move, it's an ill omen. The flock of chickens completely stopped their soft clucking and huddled together, hardly rising or falling with their breathing. Even your most sincere animal minus the goat minus would stand motionless with its head down, its whiskers covered in frost. At about 10:30, Margaret made a desperate decision. She picked up the last piece of wood, a thick branch, and placed it on the fire that was about to go out. This was what she had prepared for the late night. The flames shot higher in an instant, casting warmth and light throughout the small space. But you all know that this is only a temporary relief. We need to burn something else, she said, her voice almost inaudible in the wind. Furniture, clothes, everything that catches fire. You nodded weakly, understanding the logic, even though you knew it was in vain. The 3-legged stool, as your only piece of furniture, can provide about 20 minutes of heat. The few pieces of clothing you have might take you an extra half an hour. But after that, apart from the wooden frame of your bed, there's nothing left to burn. Without it, you'll just sleep directly on the frozen ground. Agnes showed extraordinary composure in her hypothermia and began to collect any combustible materials she could find. Wore out due to years of use. A handful of straw on the mattress, bread and some dried herbs hanging on the rafters, although they burn quickly, provide very little heat. Everything she throws into the fire can add a few more minutes to your life, but you are fighting a losing battle. Coldness is boundless, ruthless, and patient. There's no need to rush. It knows that eventually you will run out of combustible things, and then it will take over you. Every hour, the wind will find a new way to enter your room. A wooden board near the door became loose, creating another gap that allowed the cold air to pour out. Part of the wall at your feet has begun to collapse, and the mud and manure mortar have frozen and cracked. The shelters around you are falling apart, and there's nothing you can do about it. At around 11 o'clock, you heard a sound that sent shivers down your spine. Nearby came the sound of a roof collapsing, followed by screams, but they were soon interrupted. Another family has lost in the battle against the storm. You know their fate is very likely to be yours. Your own roof still stands tall, but you can hear the groans of the wood as every gust of wind blows. The psychological loss is always as serious as the physical one. Darkness seems absolute, only the afterglow of your flame can break it. Coldness has weight. It weighs on you like a living thing. The sound of the wind was maddening. A continuous howling drowned out thoughts, making communication almost impossible. Your child is now completely silent, preserving the little energy they have left. Mary lay motionless, her breathing very weak. You couldn't be sure she was still alive. John curled up tightly into a ball, his body instinctively trying to minimize heat loss. Agnes continued to help Margaret make the fire, but her movements became increasingly uncoordinated. This is the time when despair drives you to consider the incredible. You look at the animals that share space with you and realize that they not only represent friendship and future food, but also immediate fuel. Just this pig alone can burn for several hours, providing enough heat to keep you going until dawn. Lunch does not refresh this extra time. But these animals are more than just emergency fuel. They are your livelihood, your guarantee against hunger, your only hope to get through the winter, even if you survive tonight. Burning them means trading a quick death from freezing to death for a slow death from starving to death. This is a choice that no one should make. But life in the Middle Ages was full of such impossible decisions. Margaret seemed to have seen through your thoughts. Lunch does not refresh you, it does not energize. You could see calculation in her eyes. The lives of the animals are in opposition to those of her children. This is not an option at all. Not yet, she whispered. Let's wait a little longer. Perhaps the storm will stop. But you all know that the storm won't stop. If there is any difference, it is that the situation is getting worse and worse. The wind howled, even more violently. You could hear fragments, branches, thatch shards, and perhaps even parts of other buildings hitting your walls more and more frequently. The church bells rang at 11 o'clock, but in the chaos of the storm, they almost completely vanished. You have been fighting for 5 hours. There are still 7 hours before dawn. The mathematics of survival is becoming increasingly severe. You may still have an hour's worth of fuel left, and the temperature is still dropping. Your body is now starting to stop functioning. Your heart rate has dropped to a dangerous level, and your breathing has become very shallow. Margaret has to closely observe your chest to make sure you are still alive. Your skin has turned into a waxy gray companion, and your pulse is almost imperceptible. At this point, many people simply gave up. The combination of cold, pain, and despair created a peaceful surrender. Your body stops fighting. Your mind stops struggling. Then you gradually fall into a deep sleep and will never wake up again. It's very easy and almost pleasant to close your eyes and let go. But there are some things that keep you fighting. Perhaps it's your child struggling breathing. Perhaps Margaret's hand is in yours. Perhaps it's just that human beings stubbornly refuse to accept failure. You force yourself to stay clear-headed. Keep your eyes wide open and keep fighting, even if every instinct tells you to surrender. And the disaster struck again. A particularly strong wind blew away another part of the roof. This is right above the fire. Snow began to pour down, and the frozen precipitation hit the burning wood, with flames hissing. At a terrifying moment, you think the fire will go out completely, but Margaret quickly protects it with her body, while Agnes tries to mend the new hole. The damage is very serious. More cold air is now flowing into the room, and the fire is struggling to survive. You lose heat faster than you generate it, and your core temperature continues to drop. You estimate that you still have 2 hours before your body temperature drops. This is on the assumption that the fire has not been completely extinguished. Margaret made another desperate decision. She picked up the wooden bowl that Agnes had always kept and threw it into the fire. Dry wood will solidify quickly, giving off brief light and heat. Then she took a handful of straw from the mattress. Take some dried herbs from the rafters again, providing only a few minutes of warmth. But those few minutes were very precious. They are the difference between life and death, seeing another dawn or becoming another victim of the medieval winter. Your child is almost unconscious now. Mary hasn't moved for over an hour. You're not even sure if she's still breathing. John's lips were bluish and her skin felt icy cold. Agnes was still helping Margaret, but her actions became increasingly unstable and chaotic. At this point, you will realize that you might lose at least one child tonight. This kind of thought is almost unbearable, but you force yourself to face it. In the Middle Ages, the death of children was a fact of life, and winter nights like this were the times when death descended. The question became which child to save. Will you focus the remaining resources on Mary, who is the youngest and most vulnerable? John, the only boy, your potential successor, Agnes, the oldest, is most likely to survive. This is a choice that no parent should make. But life in the Middle Ages was full of such cruel calculations. Margaret seemed to have realized this as well. She took turns looking at each of your children with a look of pain and despair on her face. Then she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life, no matter how long it would last. She pulled the youngest Mary to the fire and protected the child from the cold with her own body. This is a practical decision. Mary's the most vulnerable. If she doesn't receive timely treatment, she is most likely to die. But this also means that John and Agnes will receive less warmth, less protection and fewer chances of survival. The fire was burning even lower. Margaret added another precious fuel, a wooden spoon she had carved from oak herself. It burns very fast, but the heat it provides might be enough to keep Mary alive for another hour. At midnight, the church bells rang 12 times, marking the deepest and darkest moment of the night. In the folk tales of the Middle Ages, this was the time when the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, as souls roamed, the earth and demons' predation on the weak. Tonight, those demons look really real. As the temperature drops further, your breath will freeze immediately as soon as it leaves your mouth, forming a thin layer of ice on your lips and chin. The fire hardly flared up. It's just that some burning coal offers more psychological comfort than the actual heat. Your body is shutting down system by system. Your kidneys have stopped functioning properly, and you can feel toxins accumulating in your blood. Your liver is working hard to process the waste produced by the failure of metabolism. As your blood circulation slows down, your brain becomes increasingly deprived of oxygen. This is the reason why any medieval farmers died in their sleep. Their bodies are unable to maintain the basic functions necessary for life. This will be a peaceful ending. Gradually easing consciousness, followed by cardiac arrest. There is no pain, no struggle, just a quiet sense of presence. But you're not ready to die yet. Your family needs you. This knowledge will give you the strength to keep fighting. Even when your body wants to surrender, you should force yourself to stay awake, keep breathing, and maintain the heat you can generate through pure willpower. Margaret continued to put out the fire regardless of everything. She burned everything she could find. Clothing shards, leather shards, and even straw on the wall. Each item can only provide heat for a few minutes, but the heat in these few minutes is incalculable. The animals are also in the final stage. This pig has been motionless for over an hour. You are quite sure that it is dead. The chickens were huddled in a pile of feathers, hardly breathing. The goat was still standing, but its head was lowered and it was having difficulty breathing. Margaret made her greatest sacrifice. She began to take off her clothes and threw them one by one into the fire that was about to go out. First her outer cloak, then her woolen undergarment, and finally her linen undergarment. She was only wearing her clothes, and her body was exposed to the bone-chilling cold. But the burning clothes provided her children with precious few minutes of warmth. This is a pure maternal love. This sacrifice embodies the essence of the human spirit. She was truly burning through her own protection to keep the children alive, unhesitatingly trading her own life for the children's. The coals burned quickly, but they provided enough heat to restore some color to Mary's lips, and John moved a little. Seeing what his mother had done, Agnes also began to take off his own clothes and, disregarding Margaret's protest, threw them into the fire. You tried to do the same thing, but your hand was injured too badly to control the buttons of your clothes. Margaret had to help you, her frozen fingers struggling over the leather-tied wooden buttons. Soon you will be naked like primitive people in a cave, crowded around a fire that is about to go out. You can't fail to understand the irony in it. Although medieval civilization was highly developed, with magnificent cathedrals, complex social systems and refined chivalry, you had already fallen to the most basic level of human survival, where animals fight for survival in the most primitive way. But you're still alive. That's amazing. Your family members are still breathing and struggling to survive even in the impossible circumstances. The flame ignited by your sacrifice burns even brighter in those precious few minutes. The wind outside continues to roar, and you can hear the sounds of destruction all around. Trees fell, buildings collapsed, and animals screamed in pain. Your village is being torn apart by forces beyond human control. You can do nothing but curl up in your dilapidated shelter, hoping that morning will come before the cold arrives. At about 1 o'clock, you hear a creepy sound. People shouted in the storm. Someone else is in trouble. Perhaps it was a family whose shelter had completely failed, wandering in the bone-chilling cold, seeking help. But there's nothing you can do. You can't even support your own family, let alone help others. The sound grew fainter and fainter, then completely vanished and was swallowed up by the wind. You'll never know who they are or what happened to them, but you can guess. Under such conditions, exposure leads to death very quickly. If they weren't dead yet, they might still have a few minutes to live. Your own situation continues to deteriorate. There are only a few pieces of coal left in the fire. Apart from the wooden frame of the bed, you have nothing left to burn. Margaret looked at it longingly, knowing that it might provide an hour of heat, but also knowing that without it, you would sleep directly on the frozen ground. When another section of the roof collapsed, which was right above the bed, she made this decision. Heavy snow was falling, and the wooden frame was soon buried under a pile of frozen debris. Even if you can dig it out, it's too wet to burn effectively. You only have the last resources left now: body temperature and any protection your shelter can offer. Margaret pulled all of you closer. To keep warm, she desperately huddled together. The children are in the middle, and you and Margaret are outside to offer all the protection you can. Those living animals are also approaching us. The goat was actually lying beside the family. Its warm body adds precious heat to the collective efforts. Even some chickens, instinctively, will curl up on your legs. This is the most fundamental survival. A group of creatures unite to fight against the darkness, sharing any warmth they can generate and refusing to surrender to the power that destroys them. This is disgraceful. It might be enough to keep you going until dawn. The church bells rang at 1 o'clock, but they were hardly heard in the storm. You have been fighting for 7 hours and there are still 5 hours left. The night seems to have no end, and endless pain stretches before you like a prison sentence. But you are still alive. Your family members are still alive. The fire might be going out. Your sanctuary may collapse, but the human spirit, driven by love and hope, tenaciously refuses to accept failure and burns. The howling of the wind grew louder. It's getting colder and colder. But you have to keep fighting, because in the end you can only do so. Fight for every breath, every heartbeat, and every moment of life that you can steal from the darkness. Tonight is far from over, but you have come this far. Sometimes in the coldest winters of the Middle Ages, this was enough. At about 1:30, the situation changed. The wind, which had been roaring furiously for several hours, began to change direction. It doesn't come from the north with all the power that brings the cold of the Arctic, but begins to come from the west with slightly different air quality. The weather is still very cold and there is still a threat to life, but there is a subtle difference that gives you a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the worst part of the storm is passing. Perhaps the temperature has already bottomed out and started to rise. However, as dawn approaches, it will still take a few hours, and you are not sure how many hours you have left. Your body temperature has dropped very low, making it difficult for your heart to maintain blood circulation. Your breathing became so weak that Margaret had to press her ear against your chest to make sure you were still alive. Your children are in an even worse situation. Mary hasn't moved for over 2 hours. You're not even sure if she's still breathing. John's pulse was almost imperceptible, and his skin took on a waxy appearance before his death. Agnes was still conscious, but reluctantly. Her eyes were not focused and she spoke unclearly. This is the time for you to start preparing for the possibility that not everyone can see the morning. This is a terrifying idea, but life in the Middle Ages taught you not to back down in the face of cruel reality. Death has always been there, always waiting. A winter night like this is when it calls. Margaret seems to sense your thoughts. Her eyes looking into yours were filled with leaden sadness. You could tell that she was thinking the same thing. How do you say goodbye to your child? How do you prepare them for a journey that they are too young to understand? But you're not dead yet. You are still fighting, still breathing, still holding on to a glimmer of hope, hoping that you can find the strength to hold on for the remaining few hours until dawn. The fire was just burning coal. Now, we could only barely make out each other's faces. But these faces remain vivid, still kindled by the spark of human consciousness that refuses to be extinguished. Close your eyes and concentrate the rest of your strength. The night is far from over, and the worst might be yet to come. But you have lived for so long, and this gives you the hope of living a little longer. The wind continued to howl. The cold continued to pierce through the bones. But the human spirit is still burning. Sometimes on the darkest nights of the Middle Ages, this spirit was the sole pillar between life and death. The church bells rang at 2 o'clock, and the bronze sound was almost a whisper in the howling wind. You have been fighting for 8 hours, and your body is beginning to surrender to forces beyond your control. The cold has penetrated deep into your core, and you can no longer generate heat through muscle contractions. Lunch does not refresh. It's not because you've warmed up, but because your body no longer has the energy to tremble. Margaret is pinned down on you. Her body is as cold as yours. But she continued to move slightly, adjusting the children's positions, trying to keep them warm as much as possible with her constantly dropping body temperature. Her breathing became very shallow and you could hardly notice it. When she spoke, her words were incoherent. "Children," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Are they still here? Are they still here?" You tried to check them, but your hands are completely useless now. Her fingers can't feel anything. Do not grasp or manipulate anything. Instead, you press your face against each child in turn, trying to sense the faint warmth of their breathing and the subtle rise and fall of their chests. Mary is still alive, but on the verge of death. Her breathing is very weak. You have to hold your breath to notice it. Her skin felt very cold and her pulse was almost gone. She is already in the final stage of hypothermia. If not heated immediately, she will die within an hour. John's physical condition is slightly better. Maybe it's because his large weight has given him more reserves. He was still breathing, though slowly and shallowly, with a weak pulse, but could be detected. His lips are blue and his skin is waxy, but he still has vitality. Agnes, her eldest child, is the most alert among all the children, although this doesn't mean anything. When you talk to her, she can still respond, although her language is confused and her thinking is obviously impaired. She has been helping Margaret take care of the young children and warming them with her own body temperature. This kind of behavior might have saved her life. The fire has gone out. The last lump of coal burned out, leaving only cold ashes in the center of the room. The temperature inside your HV has dropped to match that of the external air, far below 0 degrees, cold enough to be fatal within a few hours. When your breath leaves your mouth, you will immediately freeze, forming a thin layer of ice on your lips and chin. The hole in your roof has been getting bigger all night, and the snow has piled up in piles in the room. The wind keeps spinning in the space, taking away the little heat your body can generate and replacing it with cold air that can burn your lungs. The refuge has basically failed. At the beginning of the night, it was still a rough but fully functional residence, but now it has turned into a partial windbreak. The wall is tottering. The roof is about to collapse. The floor was covered with snow and debris. You are actually camping on the ruins of your own home, but you're still alive. That's amazing. Your family members are still breathing and struggling to survive even in the impossible circumstances. The human body's survival ability under extreme conditions is astonishing, and you are pushing these limits to the absolute limit. You hear a sound that makes your heart race, and snow outside the hut. Someone is walking around in the storm. For a moment, you wondered if this would be helpful. Perhaps it was a neighbor who came to inspect your family, or someone from the Lord who came to assess the loss. But the steps were wrong. For those struggling in a snowstorm, it's too light, too fast and too purposeful. Then you realize what you have heard. People took advantage of the chaos to rob families that might not survive the night. Footsteps stopped outside the door. You heard some sounds, low and rapid whispers, which you couldn't hear clearly in the wind. When you realize that your family is completely helpless even to a healthy adult when you are in a weak state, your heart is pounding. Margaret seemed to sense danger as well. She pulled the children closer together and tried to make your family group as small and inconspicuous as possible. In the dark shed, the fire went out and everything was covered with snow. You might be mistaken for a pile of fragments or abandoned items. The sound lasted for several minutes and you heard someone testing your door. The wooden board was shaking, but the leather hinges held it in place. Then you heard footsteps and walked away, heading towards another floor. You realized that the robber had decided it wasn't worth breaking into your home. This is a small act of kindness. But in your current situation, even a small act of kindness is precious. You have no strength to repel the invaders, and a few possessions you have at home, though insignificant, represent the difference between survival and hunger if you can get through the night. This incident reminds you of another cruel reality of life in the Middle Ages. During times of crisis, the social bonds that usually hold communities together may completely break. Neighbors who usually help each other have become competitors of scarce resources. The strong prey on the weak. Survival has become a matter of individual cunning rather than collective effort. Your village, which looks like a community during the day, has turned into a collection of isolated families who are struggling desperately against nature on their own. Others won't. By the morning, the social landscape will have changed forever. You start to experience what the medieval people called the final warning, the phenomenon that occurs in the final stage of hypothermia. Your body at all costs tries to sustain life by redirecting the blood from your limbs to the core organs. For a few minutes, you really felt warm and your mind became clearer. This is a cruel physiological trick, because this warm feeling is actually a signal that death is approaching. Your body is making one last attempt to maintain the function of vital organs, but this is at best a temporary measure. Once this last wave of warmth passes, your core temperature will drop to an irreparable level. But in these precious few minutes, you are more alert than you were throughout the night. You can think clearly and assess your situation with cruel honesty. What you have seen is not encouraging. Your family member is dying soon. Mary hardly breathed. Her pulse was very weak and you could hardly notice it. John lost consciousness. His body temperature was very low and his skin was as cold as ice. Agnes still responded, but her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Margaret's situation is the worst. She spent the whole night warming the children with her own body temperature. For the children, she sacrificed her own life. Her body temperature has dropped to a dangerous low point. She has severe hypothermia symptoms, is confused, has slurred speech, and shows obvious drowsiness before losing consciousness. You realize that you need to make some tough decisions. There is no fuel to burn and no way to generate heat. The survival of your family members entirely depends on the body heat and any protection you can offer each other. But with for people unlimited warmth to share, not everyone can survive. The mathematical law of survival is cruel and ruthless. Children with a smaller body weight heat more quickly than adults, but they also need less energy to keep warm. Although Margaret is an adult, taking care of her children has exhausted her savings. Your hand is injured and your body is tired. You may not have made much contribution. In the Middle Ages, such calculations were a cruel reality. Families facing hunger must decide which members are most likely to survive and, accordingly, concentrate their limited resources. This is a choice that no one should make. But extreme circumstances sometimes require extreme measures to be taken. But you're not ready to make a choice yet. As long as you have a breath left, you will continue to fight for your family. The night might be dark and cold, but it's not over yet. You refuse to give up hope. You bring your family closer together and place the youngest of them in the warmest spot. Margaret protested weakly, insisting that she was fine, but you could see that she was almost unconscious. Using your larger body to protect others from the most violent wind. Those living animals also drew closer. This goat was extremely enthusiastic throughout the entire test. It lay beside your family, and its warm body added precious heat to the collective effort. A few chickens out of instinct curled up on your legs. This is the most primitive way of survival. A group of creatures unite to fight against the darkness, sharing any warmth they can generate and refusing to surrender to the power that destroys them. This is disgraceful. It might be enough to keep you going until dawn. The wind outside continues to roar, but you think you notice a subtle change in its tone. Perhaps the storm is starting to weaken, or perhaps this is just wishful thinking. No matter what, you hold on to hope, thinking that the worst is over and that morning will bring relief. Your body temperature continues to drop, and you can feel your consciousness beginning to disappear. And now the cold is approaching you inch by inch. Your heart rate has slowed down to a dangerous level and your breathing has become very shallow. Margaret has to closely observe your chest to make sure you are still alive. At this point, many people simply let go. The combination of cold, pain and despair created a peaceful surrender. Your body stops fighting, your mind stops struggling, and you gradually enter a sleep state where you will never wake up. But there is always something that can keep you going. Perhaps it's your child struggling breathing. Perhaps Margaret's hand is in yours. Perhaps it's just that human beings stubbornly refuse to accept failure. You force yourself to stay clear, minus-headed. Keep your eyes wide open and keep fighting, even if every instinct tells you to surrender. The church bells rang again, though you weren't sure what time it was. This sound seems to come from a faraway place, as if you were hearing it through water, a thick fog. Your perception of time and space has become distorted. This is another sign of oxygen deficiency in the brain. But you are still here, still breathing, still fighting. Your family members are still alive and are persisting in their survival despite numerous difficulties. Somewhere in the distance, although it seems out of reach, dawn is approaching. This night is not over yet. But you have lived for so long in a world that is only one night away from death. This is an achievement worth celebrating. Close your eyes for a while, not to sleep, but to build up strength for the next few hours. The cold wind howled and was bone-chilling, but the human spirit was tenacious. Sometimes on the darkest nights of the Middle Ages, it was enough. The church bells rang at 2 o'clock, although the sound seemed to come from another world completely. You are no longer sure whether you heard it with your ears or it was just an echo in your gradually lost consciousness. In this cold hell, time becomes meaningless. Here a second is like an hour, and an hour is compressed into a crystal-clear moment, followed by a long and confusing darkness. Your body has entered the final stage of hypothermia. Your core body temperature has dropped below 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body is shutting down system by system, desperately trying to preserve the rest of your life. Your heart may beat 30 times per minute, so slowly that the pauses between your heartbeats feel like a tiny death. Your breathing became so weak that Margaret had to press her ear against your chest to sense any movement. The last warmth you experienced before has passed, leaving you with the coldness you have never experienced in your life. Your skin has turned into a waxy grey friend, and your lips have turned blue-black. When Margaret touches your face, her fingers leave white marks that take a long time to be filled with blood again. This is a sign that your blood circulation is slow. Your children are in an even worse situation. Ethel Mary hasn't moved for over 3 hours, and are not sure if she's still alive. If her breathing were still going on, it would have been so weak that it was imperceptible. Her skin was as cold as ice and her pulse had completely vanished. Perhaps she has slipped away while you are focused on your own struggle for survival. John lay motionless beside his sister, his tiny body instinctively curled up into a ball, trying to retain heat. His lips were blue, his skin was pale, and his breathing was irregular wheezing, with long and terrifying pauses in between. Every breath might be his last. You find yourself counting every second, hoping he will take another breath. Agnes, your eldest son, is still conscious, but very weak. When you talk to her, she will respond, but her words are ambiguous. She kept asking about the fire, wondering why it was so cold and not understanding that the fire had gone out a few hours ago and that she had nothing left to burn. Her thoughts are retreating from the harsh reality you are in and seeking refuge in the memories of warm times. Margaret continued to fight with the firm determination of a mother to protect her cubs, but she was losing this battle. She spent the whole night warming the children with her own body temperature, and this effort had already exhausted her reserves. Her body temperature had dropped to a dangerous low point. She showed severe hypothermia symptoms, was confused, slurred in speech, and had dangerous drowsiness before losing consciousness. I can't feel my hand," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible in the wind. "Are the children warm enough?" You tried to answer, but your own voice had dropped to the kneeing of a horse. Your throat aches from breathing cold air, and your tongue feels thick and clumsy in your mouth. On the contrary, you hold her hand tightly or try to hold it tightly, even though you can't feel whether you are really touching her. Most of the animals that lived with you are now dead. This pig has been motionless for several hours and its body has begun to stiffen. Most chickens also died. The small bodies couldn't generate enough heat to survive in the extreme cold. Only that goat was still alive. Even its condition was very bad, standing with its head down and having difficulty breathing. The spiral around you has collapsed. By the time night began, this humble but fully functional shelter had turned into a pile of fragments, offering only the minimum level of protection. There are many holes in the roof, the walls are tottering, and the snow in the room has accumulated up to your waist. The wind continued to roar furiously, pulling the temperature even lower. You reckon your former home is now at least minus 20 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill a healthy person within a few hours. It's already a miracle that you survived when you were physically weak. But you are still alive. This realization gives you a glimmer of hope, allowing you to hold on tightly. Your family has endured an 8-hour test and there are still 4 hours until dawn. The mathematics of survival is cruel, but not impossible. If you can hold on a little longer, if you can keep your heart beating and let your lungs breathe for a few more hours, You might witness the sunrise. At about 2:30, you began to have hallucinations. This is another sign of oxygen deficiency in the brain. You see your parents, who have long passed away, standing at the edge of the room, waving at you. You heard a voice calling your name, even though you knew there was no other living person in the village who would call you. You will feel a warmth that doesn't exist, seen on minus-existent light. These illusions are both blessings and curses. They can allow you to temporarily escape from the cruel reality, but they also indicate that your brain is stopping working. Many people who died of hypothermia reported that they felt warm and comfortable in their final moments, that even took off their clothes because they felt too hot. This is the last gift the brain gives to the dying person, a peaceful illusion that makes the transition from life to death less painful. As you struggle with hallucinations and force yourself to focus on the real world around you. When your family needs you to stay vigilant and alert, you can't indulge in pleasant fantasies. Every moment of consciousness may be crucial to their survival. Margaret also has similar symptoms. She has been talking to people who don't exist, to her long-minus deceased mother, and asking about relatives who passed away any years ago. Her grasp of reality is declining. You know, once she completely loses consciousness, she might never wake up again. "Stay by my side," you whispered, though you weren't sure if these words really came out of your mouth. "Don't go to sleep. Keep talking to me." She tried to respond, but her words became increasingly incoherent. Her consciousness was sometimes in a daze, sometimes in a daze. Each time she vanished, it took her a longer time to recover. You know you are losing her, just as you might have already lost Mary. The thought of losing a family member is almost unbearable, but you force yourself to face it. In the Middle Ages, death was an eternal companion, and winter nights like this were when it cold. You have witnessed entire families being destroyed by cold, disease or hunger. You buried your neighbors' friends, and even your own brothers and sisters. Death is not a stranger. It's an old acquaintance who has finally come to see you, but you're not ready to leave quietly yet. As long as you still have a breath left, you have to keep fighting for the survival of your family. You'll draw them closer, arrange their bodies to retain as much heat as possible, and use your own gradually weakening strength to protect them from the most violent winds that keep pouring in through the cracks of your collapsed shelter. At around 3 o'clock, something unusual happened. The fierce wind howled for over 9 hours and began to weaken slightly. The weather was still very cold and there was still a threat to life, but the merciless blow to your arm just relieved your brief respite. You're not sure if this is real or just another illusion, but you choose to believe that this is true. Perhaps the storm has finally begun to subside. Perhaps the worst is over. Dawn will not only bring light, but also free you from this cold hell. A slight weakening of the wind can allow you to hear other sounds. The gurgling stream, the gurgling sound of snow, and most importantly, the faint and steady breathing of children. Although Mary was on the verge of death, she was still alive. Her breaths were tiny and almost invisible in the cold air, but they were there. John's breathing is stronger and more regular. You allow yourself to hope that he will survive tonight. Agnes moved slightly and opened her eyes. For a moment, they were inattentive and felt confused. But they found your face in the darkness. "Dad," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Is it dawn?" "Not yet, dear," you said reluctantly. "But soon. Hold on a little longer." She nodded feebly and closed her eyes again. "But she is still conscious and clear-headed, which gives you hope. If Agnes can survive, perhaps others can too. Perhaps your family will eventually witness another dawn." Margaret seems to have improved a little as well. The reduction of wind enabled the small space to retain more heat, and her breathing became slightly less strenuous. Her condition is still critical, but she is still fighting. That's all you can ask for. Try to take stock of your situation. The shelter has completely failed, but the storm may be weakening. Your fuel has run out, but your body is still generating some heat. Your food has run out, but if you can't make it through tonight, you don't need to eat anything. Most importantly, Your family members are still alive, still breathing, and still struggling to survive. The church bells rang at 3 o'clock. This time you are sure you can hear them clearly. Lunch does not refresh you like calmer air. It reminds you that time is passing and dawn is approaching. You just need to hold on a little longer. The sun will rise in 3 hours and the temperature will start to rise slightly in 3 hours. Rescue may arrive in 3 hours. It is not until the neighbors ventured out to check on each other that the long night finally came to an end. But 3 hours is still eternal. When you fight for your life, your body temperature will keep dropping. And you can feel your consciousness flickering like the flame of a candle in the wind. Your heart beats so slowly that sometimes you wonder if it has completely stopped. But it seems that after a few minutes, it resumes its slow rhythm. At about 3:30, you hear sounds that make your heart race. The sounds outside were calling out in the storm. At first you thought it might be another illusion, but then you heard their voices again, this time even closer. Some people were walking around the village, checking the condition of the survivors. With the help odds, you tried to shout loudly, but your voice was too weak to reach your room. Try again and put every bit of your remaining strength into your efforts. Help us. Margaret also heard these voices and tried to join in your voice. Work together to create enough sounds to attract attention. The voices grew closer and closer, and you heard crunching footsteps on the snow outside the door. Is anyone inside? A voice is shouting. You recognized him as Father Benedict, the village priest. You ran around, inspecting his parishioners, fulfilling the cruel duty of counting the living and the dead. Yes, you said, breathing hard. We are still alive. Please help us. Bend is the sound of the fragments being moved to one side. Then the door, or rather the remaining part of the door, opened. Wrapped in a thick cloak and carrying a lantern. After several hours of darkness, the lantern seemed dazzlingly bright. Father Benedict glanced at your family, curled up in the ruins of your house, and then made a cross. Dear Mary, Mother of God, he whispered. Why are you still alive? He walked into the room carefully, avoiding the worst debris and kneeling beside your family. His lantern cast dancing shadows on the wall, and the small flames inside let you feel true warmth for the first time in several hours. We have to take you to the church, he said, his voice very urgent. This is the only well-preserved building in the village. There was a fire there and there were other survivors. Thinking of warmth, thinking of protection, thinking of being with the living will give you strength, which you didn't even know you had before. But you're not sure if you can move. Your body has been in the same position for several hours, and your muscles have become stiff due to cold and fatigue. Father Benedict seems to understand your situation. I'll go and ask someone for help, he said. There are still other people in the church. We'll take you there. He vanished in the storm, and you were alone with your family again. But now there is hope. The real hope that you can get through this test. Rescue is coming. Warmth is waiting. There are only a few hours left until dawn. Margaret gently pinched your hand. We'll succeed, she whispered. For the first time tonight, you believed her. The next hour passed in a haze of activity. Father Benedict returned with 3 other survivors from other parts of the village, taking refuge in the stone church. They quickly and effectively rack your family with any blankets and cloaks they can find, and then carefully lift you out of the ruins of your home. The distance to the church is only a few hundred yards, but it feels like several miles. Men are struggling in the thick snow, carrying your family as if they were precious goods. The wind is still fierce and the cold is still deadly, but you are moving towards warmth and safety. It seems like a scene from heaven. The stone wall held off the storm, and a huge fire was burning in the brazier near the altar. There were still about 20 villagers crowded inside. They were the survivors who claimed many lives that night. You are placed beside the fire, and the warmth is like a blow to your body. After several hours of bone-chilling cold, the heat is so intense that it almost causes pain. But this is the most wonderful pain you have ever experienced. You can feel the blood circulation returning to your limbs and your heartbeat starting to grow stronger. Margaret is placed beside you, and you can see the color of her face recover as the warmth penetrates through her cold body. Wrap your child in a blanket and get as close to the fire as possible. Mary, your youngest child, is still in a coma, but her breathing seems to be stronger. John opened his eyes and looked around in surprise, seeing this warm and bright space. Agnes forced a smile. Father Benedict has brought you a cup of warm broth, thin and watery, yet hot and nutritious. You sip slowly, feeling the liquid warm your throat and stomach. This is the first dish you've had in over 12 hours, and it's more delicious than any big meal you could have imagined. When warmth penetrates your body and your strength begins to recover, look at the other survivors around you. You know most of them, neighbors, friends, people you've known all your life. But some people went missing and some families couldn't get through the night. Your neighbor Tom's wife died in childbirth and he's not among the survivors. He doesn't have his 3 young children either. The old woman who lived alone at the edge of the village has left. On the other side of the small town, the parents and their 4 children were all away. The storm caused damage. Of the approximately 60 people who lived in your village yesterday, only about 20 remain now. Others lost their lives to the cold, strong winds and the collapse of inadequate shelters. This was a disaster of the Middle Ages. Such a disaster can destroy an entire community overnight. But you are still alive. Your family members are still alive. Overcoming numerous difficulties, you survived the most severe winter storm in your memory. Your hand may be permanently damaged. Your home might be destroyed. But you are still breathing. You are warm. You 2 are together. The church bells rang for o'clock, and you realize that you had been fighting for your life for 10 hours. 10 hours of cold, fear and despair tested the ultimate endurance of human beings. But you have already passed the test. You have proved that the human spirit, driven by love and determination, can overcome the most unlikely difficulties. At about 4:30, you noticed that the wind was getting weaker further. The storm that raged all night has finally begun to subside. Through the small window of the church, you can see that the snow has stopped and the eastern sky is beginning to brighten slightly. There is still over an hour until dawn, but you can feel its approach. The longest night of your life has finally come to an end, followed by warmth, light and hope for the future. Margaret held your hand in hers, and you could feel her fingers warm up again. "We made it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We really did it." You nodded, exhausted and speechless. "You got through a night that would kill most people. That night I did kill many of your neighbors and friends. You have come to know some things about yourself and your family that you never knew before. You have never doubted the courage and endurance you possess. Your child is also recovering. Mary is still very weak, but she is now conscious and can drink a small amount of broth." John sat up and looked at the other survivors with wide eyes. Agnes is helping Father Benedict take care of some other injured villagers. Her innate compassion overcomes her own exhaustion. When the night is gradually replaced by the dawn, you recall everything you have experienced. You have already witnessed the worst of medieval winters. Deadly cold and devastating storms have deprived human beings of their most fundamental survival instincts. But you also saw the best side of human nature. A mother's love is willing to sacrifice everything for her child. The father's courage to not give up. The compassion of a neighbor who risks his life to help others. The church bells rang at 5 o'clock, and you could clearly see the signs that dawn was approaching. The eastern sky is lightening, and the wind has dropped to a whisper. The temperature is still far below freezing, but it is no longer the bone-minus chilling cold of late night. You survived. All your family members survived. This is the longest, coldest, and most terrifying night of your life. But everything is almost over. The sun will rise soon. The temperature will start to rise, and the work of rebuilding life can begin. But now you are content to sit by the stove, holding your wife's hand, watching your children regain their strength, and marveling at that you are all still alive. In a world just one night away from death, this is a miracle worth celebrating. The wind continued to weaken. Through the church windows, you could see the first faint ray of dawn on the horizon. That night that almost cost you your life has finally come to an end, and with it comes a new day and new opportunities, and the hope of a fresh start. Close your eyes and pray silently to express your gratitude. You have withstood the test of forces beyond human control. You have achieved victory, suffered setbacks, been exhausted, and changed forever. Nevertheless, he still won. The winter in the Middle Ages was the worst, yet you survived. This is an achievement that will accompany you for the rest of your life, no matter how long it is. You already know that when the human spirit is pushed to its absolute limit, it can almost tolerate anything. Sometimes in the darkest moments, during the longest nights, this knowledge is enough to keep you going until dawn finally arrives. The church bells rang at 6 o'clock. For the first time in 12 hours, the bells brought hope rather than fear. Through the small windows of the stone church, you can see the lightning in the eastern sky. It's not the false dawn that sometimes appears before sunrise, but something real, a true promise. The longest night of your life is finally coming to an end. You are still very weak and still suffering from the torment, but you are still alive. Their family members are still alive. Just a few hours ago, you survived a medieval winter night that claimed the lives of half of the village. The warmth of the church fire pierced through your bones, and most of your limbs regained sensation, although your hands were still swollen and painful. Her complexion much paler than it was in the dead of night, she sipped the hot soup, looking at your child, with the intense protection of a mother who had almost lost everything. Her hardships have made her old. You can see new wrinkles around her eyes. There was a new weariness in her expression. But she is still alive, and that is the most important thing. Little Mary, your youngest child, is now conscious and can speak, although her voice is weak and harsh. The life-threatening fever in her lungs seemed to have vanished. Perhaps it was driven away by the extreme cold, or perhaps it was simply overcome by the extraordinary resilience of her young body. Wrapped in a blanket beside the stove, her cheeks gradually regained their color. John, your 8-year-old son, is recovering very well. In extremely cold conditions, children seem to be more resilient than adults. Their tiny bodies recover from hypothermia at an astonishing speed. He even ate some bread soaked in the broth. He looked around the church with a child's curiosity, just like a child who had survived something unusual. Agnes, your 12-year-old daughter, has become a hero among the survivors. Although she herself had gone through hardships, she had been helping Father Benedict take care of other villagers, delivering water to them, arranging blankets and saying comforting words. This night made her mature, something that years of normal life could never have achieved. Father Benedict roamed among the survivors just like a shepherd tending to his flock, offering both spiritual comfort and practical assistance. The church has become a refuge, a true refuge, opening its doors to anyone who needs to take shelter from the storm. The worst is over, he announced to the survivors who had gathered together. The light outside was getting stronger and stronger. The storm is over and the temperature is starting to rise. We got through this night. A murmur of relief and gratitude spread throughout the crowd. 20-3 people survived from a village where nearly 60 people still lived yesterday. This was a disastrous loss, but for those who remained, it was also a miracle. Every survivor represents a victory over those forces that seemed determined to take away every life in the village. As the morning light grew stronger, you began to assess the full extent of the damage. Through the church window, you can see that your village has been destroyed. The roof collapsed, the walls collapsed, and debris was scattered everywhere. This storm basically destroyed the material infrastructure of your community, leaving survivors almost starting from scratch. Your own level has completely vanished. The place where your home was yesterday is now just a pile of rubble partly buried under the snow. Everything you have, the little property you have left to your tools, and your winter food reserves have all been destroyed or blown away by the wind. You are still alive, but you are also homeless and down and out. But you are not the only one who has lost a loved one. Every survivor in the church lost their home, property and livelihood. This storm served as an equalizer, reducing everyone's basic needs to the same level. Regardless of their wealth or age, every person who survived that night is now facing the same challenge: how to rebuild their lives from scratch. The light outside grew stronger and stronger. Father Benedict divided the survivors into several groups. Healthy people will venture out to search for other survivors and assess the losses. The injured and the weak will remain in the church, which will serve as a temporary refuge until longer-term arrangements are made. You want to help with the search, but your injured hand makes you more responsible. On the contrary, you stayed by Margaret in the children's fireplace, slowly regaining your strength, astonished at the simple fact that you were still breathing. The search team came back with bad news the whole morning. Your neighbor Thomas and his 3 children were found frozen to death in the ruins of their home. The old woman who lived alone at the edge of the village has left. Her body was found buried under the collapsed roof of her home. A family on the other side of the small town, along with their parents and 4 children, lost their lives when the shelter completely collapsed. As more bodies are found, the death toll continues to rise. By around 10 it was obvious that the village had lost nearly to -3 of its population. Many families were completely destroyed. The bloodline has ended. The knowledge and experience accumulated by generations have gone and will never return. But there are also miraculous survivors. A 6-month-old baby was found in the ruins of a collapsed house, with the bodies of his parents shielding him from the cold. An old man whom everyone thought was dead emerged from the cellar where he had spent the night, weak but still alive. Every discovery, whether alive or dead, adds color to the complex tapestry of survival and loss this morning. A village existed yesterday has vanished forever, but something new is emerging from its ashes. A community of survivors bound together by shared trauma and interdependence. Around 7 o'clock, when the sun finally rose above the horizon and the pale sunlight spread over the devastated land, you walked out of the church for the first time after being rescued. The scene of welcoming you is both heart-wrenching and bomb-inspiring. The storm turned a familiar village into a strange landscape. The snow has already covered the eaves of the few buildings that still stand. Trees that had stood for decades were uprooted and thrown around like twigs. The carefully maintained boundaries between the houses have been erased, replaced by a chaotic mess of ruins and destruction. But the sun is shining brightly. The wind has weakened and turned into a gentle breeze. Although the temperature is still far below freezing, it feels almost warm compared to the bone-chilling cold of the night. You can hear the birds singing in the distance. Just a few hours ago, when the world was only filled with howling winds and bone-chilling cold, such a sound seemed impossible. Your injured hand throbs in the morning air, and you know you might lose at least a finger's due to frostbite. Getting injured will make it very difficult for you to work, support your family and rebuild your life. But you live to worry about these things, so even pain is a blessing. Margaret came out of the church behind you, holding Mary in her arms. Your youngest daughter is still very weak, but she is alert and quick-witted. She opened her eyes wide and looked around at the changing scenery. She was still too young to fully understand what had happened, but she was old enough to sense that something significant had occurred. "It's very beautiful," she whispered. You realize that she is right. Despite the destruction, despite the huge challenges ahead, there was something wonderful this morning. The sunlight on the snow, the azure sky, and a simple fact, that is, all of you have witnessed all of this here. This is a kind of beauty that only those who have almost lost everything can appreciate. John and Agnes are standing outside with you, and your family is standing in the morning light together. The survivors of that night will be remembered and talked about for generations to come. You have withstood the test of forces beyond human control, yet you have emerged victorious. Suffered a blow changed, forever marked by this experience, but still won no matter what. Father Benedict appears by your side, and his breath forms small clouds in the cold air. God's men will be here soon, he said. They will assess the losses, count the survivors and decide how to deal with the village. You nodded and understood the meaning. In a feudal system that ruled your life, even natural disasters became economic and political issues. God needs to decide whether it is worth rebuilding the village, or whether the survivors should be relocated elsewhere. Your future, just like your past, cannot be entirely determined by you. But now at this moment you are free oneself from the terrifying weight of the night. escaped the direct threat of death, standing freely with family in the morning sunlight, marveling at the simple miracle of survival. The church bells rang at 7 o'clock, and the clear sound of the bell could be heard in the silent air. This is the sound of celebration, not a warning. The voice of bronze proclaims that life goes on, hope continues, and the human spirit will not be destroyed by cold, storms, or any other natural forces. Other survivors emerged from the church, blinking their eyes in the bright morning light, just like creatures waking up from hibernation. They moved slowly and carefully. Though still weak, they were full of vitality and gratitude. The children who were on the verge of death just a few hours ago are now playing in the snow. Their resilience demonstrates the extraordinary adaptability of the human body and spirit. At about 7:30, you heard the sound of hoofs. Just as Father Benedict predicted, God's men will come to assess the situation and decide what to do. They rode their horses through the destroyed village with shocked and dejected expressions on their faces, clearly unprepared for the extent of the destruction. The leading rider, a well-dressed man whom you could recognize as the Lord Steward, dismounted near the church and exchanged a few brief words with Father Benedict. Their conversation was so quiet that you couldn't hear it, but you could guess what it was about. How many people died? How many survivors are there? What resources are needed for recovery? A few minutes later, the flight attendant approached the group of survivors. His expression was serious, but not without compassion. "The master ordered me to offer assistance immediately," he announced. "Food, clothes, and temporary accommodation will be arranged. No one will go hungry or cold." This is more compassionate than the feudal system you might imagine. But then again, God has a real reason to keep his peasants alive. Dead surfers do not produce crops, pay taxes, or provide labor. From his perspective, survivors represent an investment that needs protection. Nevertheless, you are still grateful. A commitment to food and shelter means that your family will not only get through tonight, but also the tough days and even weeks ahead. You will have time to heal, to plan, and to figure out how to rebuild your life from the ruins of your old life. As time went by, the full scope of the disaster became clear. The storm is not confined to your village. It is reported that the entire region has suffered similar damage. The entire community was destroyed. The road is impassable. The death toll has reached several hundred. But there are also some astonishing survival stories. Some families endure conditions that should have killed them, and some communities unite to save lives. Your own story is just one of many, but it is yours and its preciousness is immeasurable. Around 8 o'clock the sun rose and the temperature began to rise significantly. You made a decision. Even though your hand is injured, even though you are very tired, and even though the task ahead is unstoppable, you must help with the reconstruction. Not only your own life, but also your community. You go to Father Benedict. He is organizing rescue work with astonishing efficiency. You ask. He looked at your bandaged hands, at your still pale complexion, and at the obvious marks left by your torture. "You should rest," he said gently. "You've experienced enough." You replied, "We've all been through enough. But we are still here. We are still alive, which means we still have work to do." He nodded to show his understanding. There are corpses that need to be salvaged and buried, ruins that need to be cleared, and temporary shelters that need to be built. Choose the injuries or illnesses that you can handle. Despite your limited ability, you still chose to help search for survivors. Your understanding of the village and its villagers makes you very valuable. Even if your hand is injured, you can still shout loudly, listen to others' reactions, and guide them to places where survivors might be found. This job is heartbreaking. There are 3 to 4 corpses to be found. The family you have known all your life vanished overnight. You watch the children grow up, only to find that they are frozen in their parents' arms. The casualties caused by this storm are almost unbearable, but there are also happy moments. A young mother and her child were found in a collapsed cellar, physically weak but still breathing. An elderly couple was found huddled in the ruins of their home. Despite being exposed to the cold for several hours, they were still alive. Every rescue operation is a victory, a small triumph over those forces that have attempted to take away all lives in the village. By around 10 the search operation was basically completed. Of the nearly 60 residents, 23 survived. A survival rate of less than 40% is a disastrous loss, but for those who remain, it is also a new beginning. The lord's man brought a carriage filled with supplies, food, blankets, tools and materials for temporary shelters. The survivors were organized into working groups, each with specific tasks. Despite the damage and the loss of lives, the reconstruction work has already begun. You find yourself assigned to a group whose task is to clear the debris from the main road that runs through the village. Even though your hand is injured, you can still complete this work, see progress and watch order gradually emerge from chaos. This is satisfying. Margaret and the children stayed in the church, which had become the temporary center of the new community. She helps prepare meals for the staff, takes care of the injured and offers comfort to those who have lost their families. Your child is very resilient. Where they can help, when their energy permits, they play with other surviving children. When you are working, you'll reflect on what you've learned during the long nights. The discovered strength and endurance that you had never realized you possessed. You have witnessed the tests of your family under extreme conditions, as well as their courage and resilience. You have witnessed both the worst and the best sides of human nature. The selfishness of the letter and the compassion of the neighbor who risks his life to help others. Most importantly, you have learned that survival is not merely about personal strength or luck. It's about the community, about people coming together in the impossible, about refusing to give up even when it's easier. The sun rose higher and higher, and the temperature continued to rise. The snow began to soften slightly, and you could hear the sound of water dripping from the eaves of the church. Spring is still several months away, but this morning felt like a promise that winter won't last forever, and warmth and life will return to this world. At noon, Father Benedict ordered the work to stop so that the survivors could gather together to hold a memorial service for those who did not survive the night. You and your family stand on the ruins of the village, listening to the priest talk about eternal rest and sacred mercy. You will feel a complex mixture of sadness and gratitude. Grieve for lost friends and neighbors, for children who will never grow up, for families that have been destroyed, but also be grateful. I'm deeply grateful because you and your loved ones are still here, still breathing, still supporting each other and facing the challenges ahead. At the end of the ceremony, the church bells rang once for each person who lost their life in the storm. 37 times, the voice of bronze resounded through the devastated land. Bid a final farewell to those who didn't survive. Then, after a moment of silence, it once again rang out for the survivors' hope for the future, and they will continue to move forward. As the afternoon progressed, temporary shelters began to take shape. They are rough things, merely inclined stools made of recycled wooden thatch, but they are warm and dry, and they represent the first step in rebuilding life. Your own residence is very small, just enough for your family to live in, but it's yours. Although you were injured, you helped build it with your own hands, which made it precious. Tonight you can sleep under the eaves again, protected from the wind and rain and surrounded by your family. More importantly, you will sleep like survivors. You have faced the worst situation that the medieval winter might bring to you, and you have achieved victory. You know that the human spirit can endure almost anything under extreme conditions. On this extraordinary day, the sun began to set. You, Margaret and the children stood outside the new shelter, gazing at the village slowly rising from the ruins of the old village. It's different now. Smaller, changed, forever marked by what happened the previous night. But it's still alive, and that's the most important thing. The church bells rang at 6 o'clock, marking the end of your first day as a survivor. Within 12 hours you moved from the brink of death to the beginning of a new life. This is the longest day of your life, but it might also be the most meaningful. You have come to know some things about yourself and your family that you never knew before. You discovered the courage and endurance that you never doubted you had. You see the worst and best sides of human nature, usually in the same person, and sometimes in yourself as well. Most importantly, you have learned that survival is not merely about getting through the night. What matters is how you spend the coming morning, how you make use of the remaining gifts, and how you remember those who haven't succeeded through a fulfilling and purposeful life. When night falls, a gentle darkness, rather than the bone, minus chilling cold of the previous night, you gather your family around the small fire outside the tent. The flames danced in the evening air, casting warm light on your faces. You told the children the stories of those who had passed away, using words and love to keep their memories forever. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. There are crops to be planted, houses to be built and lives to be rebuilt there. Work will be arduous, progress will be slow, and setbacks will be frequent. But tonight you are content to sit by the fireplace with your family, marveling at the simple miracles of life. In the winter of a medieval peasant, you couldn't even last one night. It wasn't your lifestyle, not the resources you had, not under the conditions you were facing, but somehow you persisted. You survived. In the process of survival, you become more valuable than before, stronger, smarter, and more grateful for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of warmth and love. The stars came out, bright and clear in the cold night sky. But tonight, they don't seem cold or distant. They seem to be lighthouses of hope, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, there is always light somewhere, there is always the hope of dawn, and there is always the possibility of survival. You bring your family closer, feel their warmth, hear their breaths, and your gratitude for their presence is evident. You have withstood the test of forces beyond human control, yet you have emerged victorious. It was not unscathed, nor remained unchanged, but it was ultimately a victory. This is enough. More than enough. All of it. This is the result. A winter night for a medieval peasant would definitely ruin any modern person. From the moment the sun set on that night in January 1347 to the dawn that seemed never to come, we endured 12 hours of pure fear of survival, which made our worst winter nights look like tropical holidays. We experienced the harsh reality of medieval winters, with inadequate accommodation, no heating at all, hypothermia and the constant threat of death. We have witnessed how a winter storm has devastated an entire community. How did family members freeze to death in their own homes? Survival often depends on a shared body temperature and a firm determination. This is not a romanticized medieval world in Hollywood movies or fantasy novels. This is reality, cruel, heartless, and completely indifferent to human suffering. Knights in shining armor, grand banquets, warm taverns, and roaring fires. This is probably the experience of about 1% of people. For others, winter is the season of death and a test of endurance, and many people fail. But perhaps most notably, people survived. They found a way to endure an environment where most modern people would die within a few hours. They formulated strategies, established a community, and set up a support system to help them get through the darkest nights. Their pain is not meaningless. It is the foundation of our comfortable modern life. The family in our story represents millions of medieval farmers facing similar oral diseases. Some survived while others did not, but they all demonstrated a tenacity and determination that is almost incomprehensible from our modern perspective. They live on the brink of survival, and a cold night may mean the difference between life and death. So the next time you adjust the thermostat, put on a warm coat, or complain about a cold night, please remember that medieval peasant family that almost froze to death in their own home. Remember the countless people who have lived and died in similar circumstances, whose struggles and sacrifices have made our comfortable modern life possible. Their stories deserve to be told, their hardships deserve to be acknowledged, and their incredible tenacity deserves to be praised. Because ultimately, they are us. Human beings strive to do their best in impossible circumstances, seek love and meaning in the darkest moments, and never give up hope. Tomorrow might be a little warmer than today. Thank you for going through one of the cruelest experiences in history with me. If you enjoyed delving into the survival of medieval winters, please let me know in the comments. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. Stay warm. Thank you for living in this warm world.